Well Services Monthly Educational Webinar Series. This educational series is offered on the third Thursdays of most months at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. This month's title is Social Media in Healthcare, Developing a Proactive Plan. Please note a PDF of this presentation was available on the registration page under Event Materials. It was also sent to you as an email attachment earlier today to the address that you provided at registration. If you did not receive it and wish to receive a copy, please send a request to riskmanagement@awacservices.com. All have been placed on mute. If you need assistance during the presentation, please contact myself via the chat room feature or call 860-284-1450 for assistance. Our speakers today are Michelle Hoppus and Kristen Lambert. Michelle Hoppus is Senior Vice President of AWAC Services Company, a member company of Allied World. She is responsible for the development and implementation of risk management and loss control services in support of Allied World insurance offerings globally. Michelle has performed many functions throughout her 30-year healthcare career in the fields of nursing, risk financing, claims management, business development, leadership, and consulting. She has on several national organizations and is a frequent national speaker. She has numerous risk management articles published as well as book chapters. She has completed the leadership program as a patient safety fellow and obtained a master's degree in healthcare management with an emphasis in risk management from the Finch University, the Chicago Medical School. She is in risk management and quality review and is a distinguished fellow of the American Society for Healthcare Risk Management. Kristen Lambert. As a Vice President of Risk Management, Kristen Lambert facilitates and coordinates services for professional liability policyholders and specialty programs, help assess and manage the risks that they encounter. Prior to AWAC services, Kristen practiced as an attorney in medical malpractice defense and health law matters. She also has practiced as a clinical social worker in the hospital setting. Kristen degrees from University of Massachusetts at Amherst, Springfield College, and Massachusetts School of Law. She is admitted to the bars of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, the United States District Court in Massachusetts and Connecticut, is a licensed independent clinical social worker in Massachusetts, and is a fellow of the American Society for Healthcare Risk Management. She has served on a number of local and national committees and is a frequent presenter and author in her field. I would now like to turn the program over to our first presenter, Michelle Hoppus.
Thanks. If we could please go to slide 5 and to today's program on social media and healthcare. About today is the risk management impact. So Kristen will discuss social media and patient confidentiality. We're going to review boundary issues, the duty of professionalism, privacy concerns, safety and security, and of course we'll talk quite a bit about risk reduction strategies as well as solutions. Slide 6. On top of this, you see social media can take on different forms. There's so many forms today, it would really be tough to even try and list them all. I won't do that. Our topic today is focusing on the risks of social media. It's important to note that there are many benefits as well, both personally and for industry growth. So I certainly highlight that the benefits are significant, but today we're going to merely focus on what would be termed the downside or the true risks of social media. And I would start out not naming, of course, all of them, but talking about a little bit of it anyway, the history of social media, as the issues we're dealing with today around privacy and security, they're really not that old. It was clear to me that the first email was sent when I was in junior high. Really, it was not that long ago. And to think today that not many of us would really know how to do our business without email. Can you imagine a world without email? Okay, the year of the first email was 1971. A little history. I graduated from high school. The first line bulletin board actually emerged, and that was right around 1978. And then the social networking site wasn't actually launched until about 1994. And the social profile where users can actually list friends, that doesn't occur until 1997. So the point looking back is that the emergence of social media, although new for some of us, it's actually a way of life for many. The millennials have actually grown up in a very different type of world and with a different definition of privacy than the boomers. I got to tell you, this generational difference is what we have to acknowledge, because in healthcare, we're going to have to attempt to really define the boundaries and the guidelines around confidentiality. And it is going to be somewhat different depending on the generation of who we're speaking to. More history. It's several years ago that the dot-com bubble actually burst and the stock markets crashed. And what happened there is it brought all kinds of new entrepreneurs and they launched new connections. And you may recall, one was called Friendster. That was in 2002. They actually had 1 million users in just 3 months. Friendster clone called MySpace, that emerged in about 2003. And then in 2004, that Facebook, the biggest social network of all, was born with 1 billion users today. The fact that was just 8 years ago. So thus, the emergence of social media is coming at a fast pace with constant change. And it seems I just learned about one, and my daughters will inform me that that's already out of date. So for us, it's actually a life, an expectation for how you communicate today. I'm going to give an example that's likely not something I have experienced that I try to keep up with now in the lingo, but the social media changes. My daughters correct me, Mom, it's not my face, it's my space. Get right if you want to be up to date. Or when I FaceTime, they say, Mom, you really mean Facebook. FaceTime does exist, but that's not what you have. Anyway, it should not be surprising that we need to talk about guidelines for the use of social media in healthcare, where privacy is often dictated by regulation and law. It's only important, but it truly is a mandate, and it's a patient right. Let's go to 7. And let's look at various types of social media. The most types of social media are listed here, from email to LinkedIn to Twitter and online dating. All of these have issues with privacy and confidentiality in the healthcare setting. Looking at kind of where the media has gone, I'd like to just give you an example of where social media has gone wrong. And be sure that we're all on the same page with what the risks are and what we really are talking about today. I thought it would just be easiest to read you a few portions of a couple articles that I saw when I was prepping for the program. And the first was from the Los Angeles Times, and it was titled, When Facebook Goes to the Hospital, Patients May Suffer. This article shares numerous examples where staff have taken pictures or they've shared information about patients on Facebook. And I do just apologize in advance that I'm about to read to you is not shocking, but really quite hard to believe. And here's what the article says. Boys arrived at the emergency room at St. Mary's Medical Center in Long Beach, California on April 9, 2012, mortally wounded. The 6-year-old had been stabbed more than a dozen times by a fellow nursing home resident. His track so savagely, he almost was decapitated. Instead of focusing on treating him, an employee said Mary's nurses and other hospital staff did the unthinkable. They took photos of the young man and posted them on Facebook. Thinking, this is quite unusual. It can't be true. But it's one of many examples. It highlights what we're talking about today. It's really a widespread problem and a widespread issue. And the issues that we're talking about today are actually global issues. And I'll share another article. This is the Telegraph, and this is a UK newspaper. That records of vulnerable patients were breached more than 100 times in 5 years by staff at 152 NHS trusts and hospitals. And I would add that this is, really just those that they knew about. The article goes on to say, in one incident at a university hospital, NHS trust, a member of medical staff was dismissed after taking a picture of a patient in bed and showing it to friends on a social networking site. This report comes after the Information Commissioner said tougher powers were needed so that those who break data protection laws could be jailed. I would say that that's elevating this to a pretty high level. They're talking about jail time in the UK. Before I do this slide, I just wanted to share a few more stats. Twitter, the social networking and microblogging website, actually reports 500 million tweets a day. Amazing to me. Has a billion views a day. And there's 2 days of video uploaded every minute. To as far as social networking sites in general, the privacy settings can be activated, but the default is actually public access to one's profile. And when you set these, not everybody's aware of that. People can actually add photos of you to their Facebook account, and it's called tagging you or naming you without your consent. But even if you're really careful about the content of your Facebook page, some type of unprofessional or picture that you wished had not been in the public domain can be by other users before you discover that you've been tagged. Now, at the bottom you'll see online dating, and I just want to share with you that in some healthcare settings, this has also emerged with some new challenges as well. Health providers have actually been recognized by patients as some of the online dating services, unintentionally revealing some pretty significant personal information, which is then kind of to an inadvertent type of boundary crossing. And all, clearly was not intentional, and it was not unethical. It certainly has raised some new concerns. So I just share this with you as one thing that I would say you need to add to your list as you think about creating guidelines around social media. So let's do a case example now on slide 8. Out with a medical resident, an ED, who posts an entry on her Facebook page during a long overnight shift. Entry includes comments about the specific details of a new admitted patient's rather bizarre behavior, and that he arrived under the influence, and includes some comments about his presentation. However, there's no specific patient identification included in the nurse's post. So the question to you is posting something like this problematic? There's confidential information that was released. Just to take a minute and down whether or not you think posting something like this on Facebook is a problem. It didn't take you long. If you wrote down that this is not a problem, Chris and I really hope that by the end of this program, you'll appreciate why this actually could be problematic. You can go to slide 9. Media use in healthcare. There are many other uses of social media in healthcare that we haven't even talked about yet. And one of the hospital's own social networking sites. As you can see here, there's over 1,200 hospitals in 2011 in the United States with networking sites, and this is rapidly growing. That number is changing really every single day. The evolution of social media is being driven by many reasons in healthcare. Some include just the demand for transparency, patients searching of providers and hospitals and making decisions about where they're going to go, market attempts and visibility. And then an area that's not listed here that I do want to mention is that patients who are in a hospital that actually post pictures or information about fellow patients. Just 2 months ago in South Wales, a news article was posted stating that hospital patient under investigation following Facebook jibes. That was how it read. The hospital patient actually posted pictures and really insulting messages on Facebook about an elderly roommate in the same ward. Now, these pictures were taken, of course, without the patient's knowledge or her consent. And the fact she showed the elderly woman with a large bandage over her head. And then the Facebook post read, "What does she have across her head? She isn't putting her toilet pants in the right place. That's why she's having accidents." Fridges went on to ridicule the elderly patient for moving, which means passing flatulence. And the post stated, "What they put you in the old birds ward. That's just cool." So the issue is, again, it's another area that we must address. What's the obligation to safeguard patients from other patients when it comes to social media, especially the elderly and the young? Although there might be clear guidance on this yet, what I would suggest is that we borrow examples from some of the other situations that we've dealt with. And let's be proactive. Let's have an active approach now. Has indeed been held as responsible for protecting the patients under our care. I just suggest that we do have a need to educate our patients that this behavior has to be prohibited. And education is really what I would say our first step or our first start. Let's go to slide 10. And let's look at some ways that we're seeing social media being used by healthcare providers and in healthcare organizations that may actually increase risk. Pictures have been posted to Facebook by hospital staff. Negligence are being posted about patients, about coworkers, about working conditions, about supervisors, about salary, about benefits. Patients sending friend requests to other patients or even to caregivers. And of course, there's always the threat of cyber criminals. And that leads us to think about security of the systems that we're using within the healthcare setting to actually communicate through online methods as well. I would ask you, how private and secure is the technology that you're using today? Providers really are considered the guardians of the patient's confidentiality, and this includes verbal, written, and electronic, and also now including online forums. So the security and privacy in relation to technology has been all over the media in the United States of late. Major breaches in security reports recently by the Wall Street Journal as well as others. Go to slide 12. And this is just continuing in regards to confidentiality. Just a few pointers on what to consider in regards to using email as a communication tool. Now, email is private, but it may not really be confidential. Encryption is seen as optional to some. You should ensure that if you're using email today, many providers are, that encryption is absolutely a must. But I tell you, even if you're encrypting, that does not mean that the patient is. So lastly, be sure that all email communication becomes a permanent part of the medical record. And I know that Chris has actually had some really interesting cases regarding the use of email recently. Chris, will you just share a story or two?
Sure. Thank you. Back when I did defense work, I had a case that, without going into too much detail, involved a failure to diagnose cancer. And there was a 2-year email exchange between the patient's wife and the provider. And it really became the issue, the focus of the case, where the email printed out and used during the entire case, and it made it very difficult to defend the case because all of these emails were kept as a running log of the interaction between the patient's wife and the physician. So it certainly can be an issue when you have a lawsuit that occurs. And then also, this past fall, there was a case that in the Supreme Court of South Carolina where they found that an email inbox, an unopened email, was not confidential. So it certainly can raise all sorts of issues when you're dealing with email. Thanks, Michelle.
Hey, thanks. I appreciate you sharing that. Let's go to slide 13. So we talked about Facebook. Let's briefly look at how Twitter is being used in healthcare. Some hospitals have actually started to use Twitter as a teaching tool as well as what I would call a marketing tool, tweeting each step along the way of the surgery. There's even a networking site that's called Sermo, which is exclusively used by physicians. It offers a unique and supposedly confidential environment where physicians can informally consult on medical cases. So I'd ask you, do you know if your providers are tweeting during surgery about the case, or using sites such as Sermo for animal consults? During surgery, how informed consent being handled? What if there's a complication or an error during the procedure? How's that going to be handled? Last year, there was a hospital in Texas that tweeted during an open heart surgery and advertised, watch a live beating heart on Twitter. There are many organizations now who have participated in real-time tweeting during surgery and have put in place what are called contingency plans in advance of the surgery in case there is an emergency. This has included very carefully worded tweets that are scripted and guidance regarding when video streaming would stop immediately. This is another area to consider having guidelines in place before this is an active practice. Let's go to 14. I've got a case example now on Facebook in regards to minor patients, and I found this one really interesting. This is a case involving the use of Facebook by a mental health provider. And this person thought that it would be a good way to keep an eye on an adolescent patient under his outpatient care. So he befriended the adolescent patient on Facebook and then to monitor her activities, not all the time, but some of the time. So Martin sends him a message on his Facebook wall that says she's going to end her life. The doctor other patients who access to his Facebook page and can see the post. The doctor's on holiday and does not see the post. So What are the legal implications of this? The patient does commit suicide, and the parents allege that the physician was monitoring their child, and that she had a duty to not only warn them, but to have taken action. There's certainly several issues to consider here. Let's take the first one. Should providers even be friending patients? Chris, I want to throw that one to you. What do you think? Should they?
No, I think that there's all sorts of issues that can come up as a result of a provider friending a patient or accepting a friend request from a patient. Some of the issues that can really come up include privacy issues. What if another patient happens to see a post of the patient that's posting on the Facebook page? There's also boundary issues, ethical issues, and liability issues. You just raised some important concerns about the fact that a provider did not see the post and a patient had committed suicide. So really there's concerns about monitoring that can come into play as well. Thanks.
Makes sense. Look at this issue. The second would be kind of the concept of using social media to even think about monitoring patient activity. You know, is this good, or does this create new opportunities or new obligations, as Chris said? I think it creates new obligations, including in this case example, some that this provider couldn't possibly keep. And could such action actually create not only new actions of duty to warn, but as Chris said, liability? I'll address it again. It's another topic area for you to list as you guidelines on the use of social media. 15. So I'll turn this over to Chris to talk about boundaries in much further detail. I just want to touch on a few more areas regarding professionalism, and specifically privacy concerns for the millennial generation. There was an article recently in the Forbes magazine, and it was titled, "Privacy is Dead with Millennials. It's Actually Thriving." I share it because as managers and supervisors, learning more about how the generations perceive privacy and confidentiality is likely going to be key in how we educate them on what's appropriate use in healthcare. And I think a critical factor here may actually be reaching them by understanding what's important to them. And an area of importance to them is their reputation. Many are beginning to hear, or they're actually experiencing, the consequences of either not getting into certain colleges or not getting a job. There's a recent study from Pew Internet Research. It indicated that 44% have those comments made by others on their profiles or removed pictures. And it's actually up almost 10% in the past 2 years. Thinking that it may actually benefit healthcare organizations to not put into place very strong rules regarding the use of social media in relation to healthcare and patients, but then make this really educational, make it personal to the individual. Teach them more about how they should be monitoring, who's associated with them, how they're getting tagged. And I think educating them to this content and how it might actually negatively impact them could be a really strong focus. Just going to talk more about some of the key points specific to certain generations. It's important to note, though, that the privacy breaches are occurring in healthcare are not limited to only one generation. So not only is the use of social media a global issue, it also crosses all generations. So before I pass to Chris, let's take a look at slide 16. A reminder about YouTube. Ensure guidelines for staff include limitations about posting to YouTube. Anything that could be related to their role within the healthcare organization, anything in the public domain that could be perceived to have a connection with either their job or their position. And it should be clear in advance. So, go to you.
Well, let's look at boundaries in social networking. This is a recent study that was published in the Journal of Internal Medicine back in June of 2011. And the data collection took place from February of 2010 until May of 2010. And although there's a small percentage of respondents, it really yielded some interesting data. They broke down the study based on medical students, resident physicians, and practicing physicians. So it's interesting to note that only 59% found it ethically unacceptable to interact with patients and that only 79% had concerns about patient confidentiality. It certainly raises issues about what the other physicians thought as a result of the study. Let's take a case example. A patient sends a friend request to a physician's Facebook account. There's a ethical dilemma. Does the physician accept or decline? Consider if the physician accepts. You have possible alliance building. It can blur the boundary regarding the nature of the relationship. It can also blur the boundary regarding the treatment setting. And it invites a breach of confidentiality. On the other hand, look at if the physician declines. There's possible alliance destroying, but it confirms his professionalism and his commitment to the patient's best interest. Now, consider if the patient is a minor and whether the patients do or do not know about this friend request. Also think about if the doctor accepts a friend request and he comes to you and tells you that the patient posted something online that suggests he or she is going to harm himself. Question to keep in mind: what would you do about it, and how would the hospital minimize liability? Let's look at specific issues regarding standards of care. How treatment in these new contexts may impact the quality of care overall. We'll discuss how each of these new treatment contexts may affect patient care and the legal and risk issues involved. Let's take a look at email. Documented, recorded conversation that can resurface down the road. Calls should be recorded in written format, as well as a written transcription of your telephone conversation with a patient. With email, it's a two-way written communication. So about a few questions. Who is reading the email? In other words, if a healthcare provider is emailing a patient, how does the healthcare provider know that the patient is actually the one reading the email? How does the healthcare provider ensure that the patient actually receives the email? Or is it lost somewhere in cyberspace? Does it not actually ever get to the patient? If the healthcare provider is away on vacation or is unavailable or doesn't have access to email, what safety protocols are in place? Do you have any additional thoughts on the patient safety end with respect to email communication?
Yeah, I think as we consider the safety precautions, we really better understand how is the public using social networking in relation to healthcare. For the recent studies that was conducted again by Pew Internet was the percentage of American adults actually using social media today. And the results indicated that 87% of Internet users under the age of 30 are using social networking. No surprise there. So only 29% of those over the age of 65 years are using. They happen to be the fastest growing segment. So, in relation to healthcare, they're using social media sites to make decisions about, where they're going to access healthcare, who they're going to access it from, how they interpret this information, this data, feedback, and the outcomes that they're actually looking at, try to base their decisions. And when it comes to patient safety, it seems to me that we really need to look at how are we guiding patients in understanding and interpreting that information, especially as they're looking at outcomes. And these can certainly be found online. They're very readily available. There are new sites that patients can actually access that I thought I would just mention to you in case you're not familiar with them. One of them that you should be aware of is called Patients Like Me, data-driven social networking health site. That's what it's termed. That's what it's called. It actually enables members to share information about their condition, about the treatments that they're receiving. They can share symptom information. And the site actually covers over 1,200 different types of health conditions, and it includes global members as well. I noted on this website that they have an in-house team of research scientists, and that their business model actually indicates a goal of trying to align patient interests with industry interests. It was a pretty interesting site. There was one more that I would mention, and this is called CaringBridge.com. This is an online support group. It's described by some as a rather creative outlet during a health journey. So, Chris, back to you. And to your question about patient safety and social media, I can say it's an ever-evolving area. And one of the first steps that we have to really take a look at is understanding how are patients using these networks, and then what's our role in guiding them when it comes to decision making that can actually impact patient safety.
Thanks, Mel. I agree. I just wanted to mention, with respect to email, let's talk about informed consent issues as well. If a healthcare provider replies to an email about medication side effects without asking additional questions, has he or she missed the opportunity to consider the context in which the patient is making the request? In other words, is there an informed consent issue? Is there an open dialogue? Is there a back and forth discussion? Or is there some information that may be lost in translation through email communication? Think about the case that we talked about earlier with respect to the email inbox not being confidential. That's certainly an issue as well. Let's take a look at smartphones. Certainly have had a huge impact within all of our lives, let alone the healthcare sector. If you have an EMR system particularly, there are advantages for healthcare providers who use smartphones. Here are just a few. It provides easy, instant access to clinical data. Smartphones can enable access to clinical data whenever and wherever it's needed. You don't typically go into a hospital now and hear that old overhead paging system. Health providers typically have the smartphone on them, so you're able to get in touch with them via smartphone rather than through paging. It also provides real-time decision support. The provider can access critical values and significant patient events. Let's look at smartphones and texting. How do you know your smartphone is secure? An article came out last July about two major cell phone manufacturers that hacked into through a security flaw. So if you're standing in close proximity to a hacker's phone, they can actually access your data. Certainly an issue. Just with emails, if a healthcare provider texts with his or her patients, are they sure that some other party is not receiving the text sent to the patient? And how does he know that the patient actually receives the text? In other words, how does a healthcare provider know that the patient is the one receiving the text and that the healthcare provider ensures that the patient actually receives it? Think about if a smartphone is left on a counter or in a area where someone can access it, it sometimes will just pop up on the screen if a text is received. So someone else might actually see that text inadvertently that the healthcare provider did not intend to have this other person say it. Healthcare provider texts with his patients and becomes unavailable due to vacation or for other reasons. If the patient sends a text during that time, what safety precautions are in place in the event of an emergency? And does healthcare provider have safety precautions in place in the event that something happens? Healthcare provider has communication with patients about medication via text. Is that really in compliance with the standard of care? What about autocorrect? I know it happens to me all the time. If I send a text, it'll correct to a word that I don't necessarily mean to say. What if the wrong information was actually sent in the healthcare context? Consider if you're texting with a minor in the issue of consent. If with adult, does the healthcare provider really have the ability to have an open-ended conversation where the patient can ask questions she may have? This note, we'd like to alert you to a statement by the Joint Commission regarding texting orders. Back in November of 2011, the Commission issued a statement regarding texting orders, and the question posed was, is it acceptable for physicians and licensed independent practitioners and other practitioners allowed to write orders to text orders for patients to the hospital or other healthcare setting? And the response was, no, it is not acceptable for physicians or licensed independent practitioners to text orders for patients to the hospital or other healthcare setting. This method provides no ability to verify the identity of the person sending text, and there's no way to keep the original message as a validation of what was actually entered into the medical record. And then a side note, a recent study asked healthcare providers the question, are you aware of the Joint Commission's guidelines on texting patient orders? Only 55.3% said yes. So it also mentioned that texting is evolving all the time. For example, there's several hospitals that are that have texting programs set up. A hospital in D.C. announced a service that provides real-time updates from members of a surgical team as the surgery progressed. And then also the American Psychiatric Association announced results of a study used to that found that texting schizophrenic patients actually increased compliance with treatment. So certainly an evolving issue that's occurring all the time. Let's get patient portals. No matter where they are in the world, can log on to a patient portal to obtain medical information. Patient portals are being used by many healthcare systems for providers to communicate with patients and for patients to access medical information. Here's a few ways that patient portals assist patients. Now, patient portals for the provider. And providers just about anywhere in the world can access patient information. Using patient portals to communicate with patients is a life for many providers. And just a few ways that patient portals can assist the healthcare provider. Here are considerations when using patient portals. It's important that the patient doesn't have access to other patients' medical records. The physician or healthcare provider controls what the patient sees. Finally, the medical record remains protected, so the patient can't alter the record. It needs to remain locked and protected. Consent and user agreements should be in place. It's important the username and password protected. Consider security. It's important to have a lockout system, so if an incorrect password has been entered so many times, the patient has to go into the office or hospital to unlock, to re-enter the portal. So with respect to sensitive medical record information, avoid for use in treating patients who have substance abuse issues, mental health treatment, or HIV. Let's look at BOD. Most devices are just that. They're mobile. So here's just a few issues that can come up. This is why security is so important with these devices. Just look at some of this information. Michelle, heard of any cases involving stolen laptops?
The issue that I would add is that that seems to be a pretty common theme, to be honest with you, around stolen laptops and the theft of patients' private information. The issues that I've seen recently actually involve a lack of encryption. The computers are usually password protected, but the data is not encrypted. It was actually just in the last few weeks there have been reports of several stolen laptops with patient healthcare information. One actually involved a hospital in Indiana. They notified over 29,000 patients that their personal information could be vulnerable. And another one that occurred shortly after that in Idaho. It was actually a hospital worker's laptop that was stolen from her car. That one had hundreds of patient records on it, and again, it was not encrypted. And just a few months ago, there was a $1.5 million fine that levied against a Massachusetts organization for privacy violations when an unencrypted laptop was stolen. It actually put about 3,500 patients' personal information and research subjects at risk. So a fine was levied, and when they did levy it, they actually indicated it was specifically because of a failure to conduct a thorough risk analysis of confidentiality of electronic protected health information on portable devices, and they did not implement sufficient security measures. So again, I would just drive home that whole issue around, encryption. Some seem to feel that password protecting is what we need to do, and that's just not enough.
Thanks, Phil. We're certainly hearing about these issues frequently, and it'll be interesting to see if they continue to occur as the social media world continues on. Thank you. Look at bringing your own database. I read an article that came out about the impact of bringing your own database on the healthcare system. This has been gaining momentum in a host of other businesses where mobile workers are use commercially available cloud storage and other types of storage to store data while they're on the go rather than to store it on their mobile devices. A recent survey asked respondents, do you have a documented mobility strategy in your hospital? 4.1% said yes, while 65.9% said no. It certainly is wise to have a BIOD policy put in place in your healthcare organization. Here are a few risk reduction strategies for the healthcare facility to think about making part of their policy. Contain data inventories. Know the data is stored. Policies that are device agnostic but device aware. Monitor different types of devices accessing the network and what storage applications may be available. Network level blocks of unauthorized storage sites. Providing for users about cloud storage and security weakness. Let's look at security. There are many things that you can do to lessen the risk when using mobile devices. We just have listed a few here. Maintain control of the device. Who has access to the device? Ensure all data is secure. Secure connections, HTTPS or SSL. Disable Wi-Fi and Bluetooth when not in use. Some risk management strategies can include, with Bluetooth, make sure to set them to non-discoverable, use passwords, avoid using public Wi-Fi and hotspots, don't click on suspicious links, and apps you're installing. We're updated, and don't share username and passwords. Take a look at mobile apps, and this is certainly growing on a daily basis. They're popping up all over the place. Physicians use them to be more effective and more efficient. Patients use them to monitor aspects of their health. Both Apple's App Store and Google's Android market now have medical sections. So there are many apps out there that can be used and accessed. HIPAA concerns are just as relevant with these types of mobile apps as they are with use of technology, for example, security, encryption, and HIPAA high-tech. Before using an app, you should do research on the security issues. As the one that's charged with responsibility for safeguarding patient health information, as we talked about earlier, you need to do things such as have a written privacy policy that explains information, how it's collected and how it's shared. Some attorney generals are starting to hold app companies accountable, but there's certainly a long way to go. And they said there are a number of apps out there that can be used that do with healthcare issues. I mentioned this case earlier. This was a case in Australia that had to do with a patient posting about another patient on Facebook. So patients are entitled to privacy, and this certainly is doubtful via an isolated incident. So we've been talking about how some of the issues when providers use social media, and certainly this can impact how the hospital is affected as well. Time to roll up your sleeves and create a social media guideline for your organization if you haven't already. You may be asking, where to begin? It's so overwhelming. What do you need to think about? Who needs to be involved? In a few minutes, we're going to spend some time sharing a simplified process that may be helpful to guide you in your planning and development of social media guidelines for your organization. Create a committee. You can do it all by yourself. Who should be involved? Think about some of the folks that should be involved: IT, corporate communications, corporate compliance, human resources, and certainly include representatives from all generations, especially Gen X, Gen Y, and Millennials. You really want to cover all of your bases. lot of resources out there. Many hospitals have posted their social media guidelines or policies online. Do homework, see what others are doing. Review existing policies addressing email, internet use during and after work hours. You may simply need to just extend your existing policies to address social media. Take a look at some available policies and guidelines from other hospitals. See what's already. Reach out to others in your industry. You may have policies in place for email, computer use at work, and public discourse. And make sure that these existing policies extend to social media. Decide what needs to be covered. Conduct a needs assessment to determine where there are gaps in your current policies, and also who the social media policy needs to be extended to. What makes sense for your business and employees. What works in a non-manufacturing plant needs assessment isn't likely to be relevant within your hospital or clinic. Talk with other policies and guidelines you benchmark. It's time to sharpen those pencils and begin developing the content of your social media policy. The guidelines should match other policies and also reflect the culture of the organization. Otherwise, employees won't take it seriously and it won't be effective. Make sure employees understand what constitutes social media. What exactly is it? Other employees may think you're only concerned with a specific type, such as Facebook or Twitter. How about Instagram or other types of social networking methods? Define exactly within the guideline what social media is and what it covers. Be sure to cover what will happen if the guidelines are violated, including any disciplinary actions that might include termination. Guidelines, word for word, as a group with a committee. Review and edit. Makes changes as needed. Present guidelines to your policy committee or department if you have a policy committee. Elicit the committee support and make sure that they're on board before your next step. Guidelines won't be taken seriously unless you have a buy-in from senior leadership. Make sure that the top-level management understands the need for these guidelines, the benefits of the guidelines, and the guidelines themselves. Guidelines will help you sell social media to senior management. Make sure your legal department is involved in the finalization of your policy. Explain the why and what the expectations are. Include training in new employee orientation and review materials annually and whenever changes are made to the guidelines. Obtain feedback. Some organizations let employees help shape guidelines. Post it on your intranet and consider allowing employees to edit these guidelines and tell you what you've got right and what doesn't make sense to them. Let employees know who they should call if they have questions about the guideline parameters or definitions of social media and how they may or may not use social media. We've developed a policy. Keep in mind that it's not stagnant. Social media evolves every single day. You'll reevaluate this policy often to make sure it addresses evolving social media complexities. You certainly will want your social media policy to match the current social media environment. And as I said, it changes on a daily basis. Solicit employee feedback. Consider rewards for employees who give you tips and suggestions. Take a look at Gen X and Gen Y. Gen X experienced the introduction of the personal computer, the start of the video game era, and cable television and the internet, while Generation Y have really grown up with social media. And I know that Michelle talked about this earlier. Certainly when you're developing a policy, use a cross-section of ages and backgrounds when developing the policy. The generation is generally very tech-savvy, often on the cutting edge of what's trending online. Having them in the process, not only in development, but also in directly educating staff, could be very beneficial. Feedback from the younger generation. Communicate through electronic means. Educating them on proper use of the media is crucial. The younger generation will likely use Facebook or Twitter, so talking to them about what's appropriate use and what is not, whether they can communicate with patients, with one another, and otherwise, should be clearly defined in the policies and procedures. Consider prohibiting staff and staff use of social media while at work. All organizations need a policy to address the use of social media. Policy considerations should include some of the following. Who can access social media from the organization's network? Once this is determined, what network settings will be activated? Define what is considered inappropriate use of social media. What will the consequences be for inappropriate use? Do employees that witness inappropriate use have any responsibilities? Really spell out the expectations. The social media policy will most likely require modification of other policies. So just ensure all of these policies are in sync with one another. Ensure that employees and the medical staff understand and acknowledge that they're not speaking on behalf of the organization when posting on personal social media sites. This out clearly in policy language, and address the responsibilities of employees when they're posting outside the realm of their employment. I'll turn it over to you.
Chris, appreciate your time on this, and I appreciate all of you attending and listening. Lisa, I'm going to turn it back to you.
And Kristen, on behalf of AWACS Services, I'd like to thank you all for participating in this event and hope you will join us again in the future.